Hi and welcome back to my channel. It's the start of November, the start of a new month and new reading opportunities, and also time for me to pick a new theme for the month. Now for November I will be doing something different because I will be playing a TBR game, and specifically I will be playing a Jokes on Me from the channel is Bailey Reading. So I've always really loved seeing Bailey playing her TBR game, and I had it in the back of my mind to see if I could play this, one day. So a couple of weeks ago I was watching a live reading sprint of Lizzie's Literary Life, and she was talking about how she was going to play Jokes on Me in November, with a couple of friends. So I asked if I could join, and they said I could, and I checked with Bailey and she was happy for me to play this game, and she gave me a copy of the board, and that was a very long-winded way of me saying that I'm going to play Jokes on Me in November. This is the playing board, and you might notice that it says Marcella's version right there. There were some prompts on the original board that didn't really work for me. Bailey obviously made this as a TBR game for herself, not for everyone to play. So there were some prompts for like NetGalley books or Book of the Month books, for example, that that I don't have. So I changed those out for some prompts that would work for my own reading challenges, and then Ruby of Ruby Red was very kind to change the board for me. She made the original design for Ruby, so that's why I asked her. Anyway, if you are not familiar with Jokes on Me, the idea is that you have this playing board, and your goal is to make a loop around the board. Every square is a different reading prompt, and the idea is to flip a card, a playing card, and the number on the cards indicates how many spaces you move around the board. But of course it's a little bit more complicated than that, because some numbers might also mean different things that could possibly speed up or slow down your journey around the board. Yeah, I think I'll just have to play the game to show you. So let me set up the game. Okay, so here's the board. What Bailey usually does is she starts in the right hand corner, I think, and she doesn't use a playing piece to go around the board, but she just grabs something near her to have as a playing piece. So I grabbed a matchstick, and that's going to be my playing piece for this game. Fun fact, a matchstick in Dutch is called a lucifer. So do with that what you will. And what she does is she will do 3 card flips. I've got my cards here, I've shuffled them. You gotta trust me on that, because I'm not gonna shuffle them on camera, because that would be way too awkward, because I'm not very good at shuffling. She does 3 card flips per episode. It's what she calls, when she does one video of playing this game. So yeah, let me just start the first card flip. I've got these cards by Mucha, by the way, which I got in the, there you go, Mucha Museum in Prague, and they're very beautiful. So yeah, first one is a 4, which is move backwards. Well, that's a good start of the game. 1, 2, 3, 4. Most popular, which I think is like the number of ratings on Goodreads or the Storygraph. So not like the highest rated, but like the most people who have read the book. Let's see, next card is a 2, and a 2 is do the prompt twice. So 1, 2, the oldest published book on my TBR, and the last flip is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is a book from a readathon I'll be participating in this month. So yeah, those are my first 3 prompts. As you can see, I did not move around the board a lot. So it's going to be a while if we continue this way. So I'm back in front of my bookshelves. This is my TBR, my physical TBR, and I forgot to mention beforehand that I'm gonna pick as many books from my physical TBR as possible. So whenever it says, you know, the highest rated or the longest book or the shortest book, I'll be picking from these books. I'll only be reading from my Kobo when, you know, there's a prompt that specifically asks for something that I don't have a physical book for. You know, if it's like the author's name has to start with this particular letter, something like that. So yeah, just wanted to still mention that. So let's get into the books I'm gonna read. So I had a little look on Goodreads because the first prompt was the most popular, what's it called? Yeah, most popular book, and so that is the largest number of readers on Goodreads or the Storygraph, and the one that came up was actually this one, The Count of Monte Cristo, which has nearly a million ratings on Goodreads, but this book I'm not going to read because I've got plans for this in 2025 to do a buddy read, so I'm not going to read this book. And then the next most popular book, with quite a big gap because this has like 100,000 ratings, which is still a lot, was this one. Gosh. They're in too tight. Which was this one, The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And this is one of those books that I had picked up because it sounded really interesting, but right now I cannot really remember anything about the book. I know it's about slavery and that's about it, but I'm keen to finally get to this because it's been on my TBR for quite a while. The next prompt I landed on was the oldest published book, and I have to read 2 books for this prompt. And again, the oldest published book on my TBR is this one. Again, not going to read it. So the next 2 oldest published books are these 2. So we got Jonah's Good Find by Zora Neale Hurstan, and Now in November by Josephine, which were both published in 1934. So it'll be interesting in a way to read 2 books from the same year. This book, again, I don't really know what it's about, but I have loved Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurstan, so I'm keen to read another one. And then this one, Now in November, is a book that I've heard both Greg of Supposedly Fun and Kim of Middle of the Bookmarch speak really highly about, and I think it's like a family story set in a rural town in I think the Midwest in America, and I think, yeah, it will be interesting to you know, read a book set in like a white community in the Midwest, and then also read a book set, I think, in Florida, in like a more black community, and you know how those compared, you know, living in the same time but in different places. So yeah, those I'm gonna read for my oldest published books. And then the last book was a book for a readathon. Now I'm not like actively participating in a readathon this month, but it is non-fiction November, so I definitely want to you know, read some non-fiction books as well. So the So the book I wanted to read was, I think I'm gonna go for this one, which is Femina, A New History of the Middle Ages Through the Women Written Out of It. So yeah, it's a book about the women, influential women of the Middle Ages. We don't get taught in schools these days. Yeah, would love to get into some history. So yeah, this is my TBR for my first episode of Jokes on Me, yeah, I'll check in with you when I've read some. So I have finished my first book, which was The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This was his debut novel. He has written some essay collection, non-fiction works. Probably the most famous one is Between the World and Me. And I think this is his only fiction book so far, but I might be wrong. So this is a historical fiction novel set in what is called the antebellum South, so just pre-Civil War, and we follow this enslaved man called Hiram. He works on a plantation which is kind of past its glory days. I'm using quotation marks because I'm talking about the glory days for the owners of the plantation. The land is not as profitable as it once was, and a lot of the slaves are being sold to slave owners that are a lot more cruel. Hiram is mixed race. His father is actually the plantation owner, and his mother is a black woman who was sold away. Also, Hiram is involved in an accident where he's out with the slave master's son, so essentially his half-brother, where the son dies in this accident and he doesn't. So all that together makes that Hiram tries to escape bondage and tries to get on the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad, you probably know, was an organization or a network of safe houses and secret routes for people who wanted to escape slavery and move to free states or to Canada where slavery was prohibited. So Hiram eventually succeeds to escape slavery, and he ends up in Philadelphia, where he ends up involved with the Underground Railroad himself. Because he, and now we get to like a more magical realism, supernatural, not sure how to call it, part of the book. Hiram has a power called conduction, which means in his case that through the power of storytelling and memory he can create portals through which he can move himself and take other people with him, so move from one space to another, which is obviously a useful skill to have on the Underground Railroad. So that is basically what happens plot-wise. Maybe I have revealed a little bit too much. I'm personally not very bothered by spoilers, especially not in literary fiction, where plot reveals are usually not the most important thing of the book, but if you do, then I do apologize. Anyway, I really enjoyed this. First of all, I thought the writing was really beautiful. It is very lyrical and very vivid and immersive. It doesn't shy away from telling us the brutality of, you know, the topic of the book, but the writing is also poetic in a way that it makes it more palatable, and like it never gets violent for violence sake. I thought the characters in this book were all really well done. Not only the protagonist, but a lot of the side characters were very well written. They all had a rich and complex history, which gave a real depth to these characters, and they were all flawed in one way or another. You got to know the different sides of their characters throughout the book. You know, instead of meeting a person and having a first impression and that impression not changing, there was often more to a person that I first saw, or they showed something of themselves that I didn't see coming, acted in a way that I didn't expect, and that, you know, added really to the roundness of the characters. I love it when it seems like an author has given a character a history, and even if you never really learn that character's history, you can still see its influence on the decisions the characters make and on its personality. And I think that it's definitely something that Ta-Nehisi Coates has done very well in this book. Like it isn't all revealed, but it's still there. I also really love the supernatural aspect of this book. I thought the way he connected this power of conduction, of harnessing the power of memories and water to create these portals, of connecting that to the Underground Railroad is very interesting. I think in a lot of ways he stays very close to the actual history of the Underground Railroad. I'm not super familiar with that history, but from what I know, he uses a lot of the same terminology and locations and, you know, the way they operated. Also, Harriet Tubman, you know, who's an actual historical figure, is fictionalized in this book. But I love how the author adds an extra layer to this with this magical element, because it becomes a metaphor for the importance of memory and remembering. And enslaved people were stripped of their history and their names and their culture, and the act of remembering and reclaiming those memories and those stories, and connecting with their ancestors, it is what literally gives the power to their liberation. So yeah, I really liked that aspect of the story. One thing I didn't really get on with was the pacing of the story. I felt it was a bit uneven. I felt like my engagement in the story was really fluctuating throughout the book. There was moments where I was really interested and engaged, and then others I was kind of bored and the story felt a bit sluggish, and it just kind of went up and down like that throughout the book. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. There was definitely like 5-star potential parts in this book, but then overall it didn't quite work out that way, but I still would really recommend this one. So I have finished 2 books since we last spoke, one fiction and one non-fiction. Let's start with the fiction book, which was Jonah's Gourd by Zora Neale Hurstan. This was her debut novel, published in 1934. Yeah. And apparently it is a semi-autobiographical novel in that Hurstan based the story of the main character on the marriage of her parents. So the book starts when our protagonist John witnesses a physical fight between his mother and stepfather, and he intervenes. His stepfather ends up demanding that he leaves home, and John is like, well, it can't be worse than this. So he moves out and ends up finding work at a plantation. The book jumps ahead in time every few chapters. So like first he's working at the plantation, then we move forward a few years and he's married. We move forward again and he ends up working as a priest. And so you basically just follow him throughout his life. Now, John is quite a character. He is charismatic, he has a good way with words, which obviously helps him with his work as a priest, and also because of his physicality, he's like a big man. He also demands a form of respect. You know, he's very much a larger-than-life character. but he's also the biggest asshole. He is unfaithful to his wife numerous times. He only thinks about himself. He goes off for days at a time, leaving his wife and children alone. There's a point in the book where his wife Lucy is ill, terminally ill. It isn't explicitly said, but it sounds like she has lung cancer, and she says to her husband at one point, like, you've been away for 4 days, I'm sick in bed, I can't take care of the children, and I need your help. Don't give me excuses about work, I know you've been with other women. And John reacts like, why are you always complaining, why are you always nagging me, when his wife is literally dying. And that was something that I actually didn't like so much about this book, because we are following John. It's from the third person perspective, so we're not in his head exactly, but the focus on the book is on John, and I noticed that I really didn't have patience for him. I didn't have the time or the will to care for him when he so evidently did not care about anyone but himself. I would have loved to have learned more about Lucy or his 2 wives after that, because I think they seem to be way more interesting people. And I think the fact that I got stuck with a character I didn't really like really put a stamp on my enjoyment of the book. And I don't always need like a likable character, but in this case I just didn't connect at all, and I wanted more about the female characters. But yeah, it is a very well written book. I think the dialogue especially is very well done. It is written in a Black Southern dialect. I have read some reviews where people said that really bothered them, but I actually really enjoyed it. Yes, it takes some time to get used to, but to me it helped to just read it out loud or sound out the words in my head. And once I got used to the rhythm of the speech, I got used to it pretty quickly. And even if I wasn't sure what a word was at first sight, I still liked the figuring out part. It didn't take me out of the story in any way. But yeah, I think if reading dialect is something that always bothers you, then this might not be for you. I really liked it, and I thought it brought a real sense of authenticity to the story, and an extra layer of emotion. Yeah, the dialogue was really good, really authentic, also really funny in some places, and there's like a great bit of physical comedy in this as well, especially in the first half of the book. There were some great scenes between John and Lucy when they first started to get acquainted. There's this great part where they are sitting in a room together, and Lucy's mom keeps on interfering because she doesn't like John, and she wants to sit them apart. She wants them to sit apart for at least 3 feet, and she keeps on shouting for the other room to talk louder because they shouldn't be talking secrets, and it was just really comical. I would read it to you, but me as a white person from Europe, it would be weird to try a Black Southern dialect. Yeah, I think I like how the book paints a picture what life was like at the time for Black people. This book in particular is set in an all-Black community in Florida, which is based on the town that Zora Neale Hurstan grew up herself, and it just shows how they lived, how they interacted with each other, what kind of work they did, how they dealt with problems as a community. There's a strong cultural context in this book with like music and songs, and also the interaction of John's work as a priest and Christianity as a belief on the one hand, and then the use of voodoo and other strong folkloric elements in this book on the other hand. And I think that juxtaposition between spirituality and the strive to be your perfect self, and for John to be a role model as a priest and inspire other people to strive to be their best self on the one hand, and on the other hand for him to be someone who is constantly tempted by his very physical, very earthly desires, and not only being tempted but also succumbing to that is an interesting juxtaposition. I really liked how the author handled that in this book, and also this idea of forgiveness and redemption that was explored in this book. There were some interesting themes going on which I really liked. Overall I enjoyed it. I just wished we had a different main character and we focused on some of the women, because I think their stories were more interesting. So that was Jonah's Good Fine. And then the non-fiction book I read was Femina, A New History of the Middle Ages Through the Women Written Out of It by Janina Ramirez. And I really, really enjoyed this. This book is basically about different women living throughout the medieval period, and how they were a lot more powerful and a lot more influential than previous history books would make us believe. So this book has 8 or 9 chapters, and they are all structured in the same way. It starts with the discovery of a certain object, from an archaeological dig or a tapestry or jewelry or something like that has been discovered. What it looks like and from what time period it is, and from what location. Then you get a bit about life in general around the time from that object, and then the author dives more deeply into the object himself and what it says about the person, or in this case the women it belonged to, and just we learn more about that particular woman. I personally really liked how it was structured, because I think in this case it felt more like an introduction to the topic, which really worked for me personally. I can imagine that some people find this a little bit too surface level, but for me it really worked. It had these 8 or 9 examples, and of course then only to have 30 or 40 pages to spend on one person's entire life is altogether way too short. I think with all the women discussed in this book, there have been, or there should be, entire books written on them. But what I think the author wants to do with this book was not necessarily to write about these 8 specific women. I think she could have picked 8 different women and we'd still have the same or similar book. I think rather what she wanted to do was to challenge us to change the way we look at history, how we should be more critical towards our sources. For example, there is this one chapter on Birka warrior. There was a grave discovered in Sweden where a person was buried, and they were sitting on like a throne, and they had 2 horses in that grave, and a lot of weaponry, and for a long time it was assumed that this person was a man, because surely someone buried with weapons had to be a warrior, and automatically that meant they were a man. Until someone decided to do DNA testing on the bones, and the person turned out to be a woman. And then still with the DNA proof there was a lot of backlash, because it went so against the established order of things that people found it really difficult to adapt to new facts. So yeah, this book challenges us to reevaluate our beliefs about gender, and like I said, be critical about our sources and where we learn our history from. Again, with the Viking example, a very stereotypical view of Vikings is them being violent and plundering and raping their way around England. But you know, where does that stereotype come from? Probably not a lot from Vikings themselves. In fact, one of the few written accounts of someone who visited Scandinavia at the time was a man from the Middle East who visited Sweden for a while, and then when he went back he wrote something about the people he met there. So can you imagine, in like 500 years time, someone would try to characterize an entire country or an entire people on, you know, one TripAdvisor review someone gave. Yeah, so for me that was the biggest takeaway from the book. Yes, I loved reading about all these women. Yes, I tabbed so many things I want to do more research on. It took me ages to read this book because I kept on going on different research tangents, and you know, looking up other people that were mentioned, etc., etc. But I love how it rekindled a love of history in me, just how history connects to our current times and how we are part of history. I'll actually read you a little bit from the closing chapter, because I feel like the author said it best herself. She says, read text, look at artworks, examine archaeological finds, draw up statistics or peer through a microscope. It doesn't matter which disciplinary approach you favor, as all subjects have a past, whether it's mathematics, biology, anthropology or art history. Scrutinize how you've been taught. Ask questions about what stories you're not hearing, and push outside of comfort zones in search of less well-trodden paths. We are all responsible for how people in the future will interpret the historic times we are living through. But first, we need to look backward to understand where we are now and create the future we want to see. These medieval women changed the times they lived through and left echoes of their lives for us to uncover centuries later. Every one of us is part of the ever-shifting passage of history. It's our responsibility to think about how we want it recorded and remembered. So yeah, read this book if you are interested in history, or read this book when you're not interested in history, and you will learn why you should be interested in history. Yeah, that was Femina. So for this video I have one more book to read, and I have actually already started it, which if you remember was now in November. This is the Naked hardback, and I'm about a third of the way through, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So yeah, I'm gonna continue with that and catch up when I finish it. Okay, I have just finished the last book for this video, which was now in November, by Josephine Johnson. This is the Dutch translation, which came out earlier this year. It's translated by Lette Vos. I think as an object this book is beautifully published. I think it has a really nice cover, very nice colors, and then these really striking yellow end pages. Yeah, this is one of those books that I think is one of those rediscovered classics. It was very well received when it first came out. It was Johnson's debut novel. She ended up winning the Pulitzer Prize for this book when she was very young, I think only 25 or 26 years old. But this book has been out of print for a very long time. It only came back in print a couple of years ago. I ended up really enjoying this book. It's one of those very slow-paced, reflective, not much happens in this story for most of the time of the book, kind of books, which is not for everyone, but I really love every now and again. So this book is about a family. The father of this family has just lost his job in the city. This book is set in the Depression era, and he decides to move his family to a farm that has been in the family for years. It's a farm that hasn't been worked on for a very long time. It hasn't been lived in. And the idea is that they move to this farm, they live off the land, and they become self-sustainable. But it turns out that the land is very heavily mortgaged, and they need to do more than just sustain themselves. They need to make a profit to keep on paying the bank, and this is something that constantly looms over this family throughout the book. It's also the time of the Dust Bowl, so the land is very dry. They are constantly waiting and hoping that it will rain, and they are just working very, very hard, constant, hard, back-breaking labor, but they have very little to show for it. They are poor, they're hungry, and there is this constant sense of falling behind, of never being able to quite catch up, no matter how hard you work. But yet they persevere, they keep on going, they keep on having this sense of hope that things will get better, and rain will come, and the next year will be better. The book is told from the perspective from the middle of three sisters, Margaret. At the beginning of the book she's 14 years old, and the book moves throughout about 10 years. She's a very quiet, introspective kind of girl, but she's also very observant. She has a very keen eye. She observes the landscape and the nature and just her environment at the farm, but also the other members of her family. The farm is very isolated. There are other farms around, but it's not like they see their neighbors every day. So the book is just very much this family on their own, and Margaret, she observes them and she sees them, and she understands them in a way that maybe they don't even understand themselves yet. She sees how her father is proud and how he is determined to make their lives on the farm work, how he wants to provide for his family, and she sees how her mother is unwavering in her support of her husband, and how her fate is very important to her and how it keeps her going. Her oldest sister Karen, she is very spirited and independent, and she yearns for a life that is more than just this farm. She really struggles with gender norms and what is expected of her as a woman, and the kind of things that she wants to do are not considered ladylike. And Margaret sees how this is eating away with her and how it makes her angry. And then the younger sister Merle, she is very sweet and loving, and keeps on being very positive, but yet she's also struggling, but does it quietly. I really loved reading this book from Margaret's perspective because she is so smart and reflective, and she really seems to understand things on a deeper level. She's much more profound than I ever was as a teenager, but it makes for a very beautiful book. The writing in this is really beautiful. There's a lot of nature writing in this book, if you like that sort of thing, and I definitely do. I would say the landscape is almost like its own character. I think that is probably one of the things that the book wants to say, that nature will always take its own course, and the land will always do its own thing, how much, no matter how much you want to change it. And it's about our relationship to the land, how we depend upon it, and how fragile this bond is with the land and with nature. Yeah, I thought this was really beautiful. I obviously read it in the Dutch translation, which was really, really well done, but I would also love to try the English edition, just because the writing is so stunning. I think it is the kind of book that I could revisit time and time again and get something out of it every time. So yeah, that was my reading for this month and for this episode of Jokes on Me. I think I had a really good reading month. I did think I would read more in regards to the number of books, but I ended up really loving what I read. I honestly think that these 3 are all in contention to be in my favorite books of the year video at the end of the year. So yeah, that really shows how good a reading month I had. I will now pause the Jokes on Me game for a little while, even though I really enjoy playing it. My goal is still to loop around the board once at some point, so I will get back to it in the future. I'm just not sure when that will be. Anyway, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.